911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See up!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Michael Freeman. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, man. I've been excited to talk to you, so I'm glad that we're here. Let's get right into it. Let's first, some people may not be familiar with you, so let's start there. Let's tell a little bit about you and your background and what got you here talking to me tonight.
Well, yeah, I'm Michael Freeman, and I'm the son of Paul Freeman, and he's generally considered a Bigfoot legend, at least one of the pioneer researchers, especially here in my area, which is around the Blue Mountains, southeastern Washington, northeastern Oregon. And I've been involved in Bigfoot, I guess you could say, since I was 5 years old. And my dad came home from the first encounter that he had.
So was that what got your dad into it? That's one of the questions that has been on my mind. And it's that way with just about everybody who gets into this kind of stuff and makes a name for themselves, in particular with Bigfoot research. Is that what got your dad interested in this, was having his first encounter?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. My dad was not a believer in Bigfoot, actually. He was one of those people that had been hunting and, tracking and trapping his whole life. That's the way that he grew up. And he didn't believe in those kind of things and thought that they were just, stories that got passed around or a Native American myth or lore, and was not a believer. And he actually took a job with the Forest Service in the Umatilla National Forest with the Mill Creek watershed. And he had been on the job for about a month. And on June 10th, 1982, he was out patrolling his section of the watershed that he was responsible for. And he had an encounter and he ran into one, and it set off a 15-year obsession. And obsession is maybe not a strong enough word, actually, in his case.
Would you tell the audience a little bit about what happened during his first encounter?
Yeah. Well, he was a border patrolman, so he was responsible for about 25 square miles, and he had a service truck that he would drive. He was also on horseback from time to time, but on this day he was driving a service vehicle, and he had been asked by the game biologist in Walla Walla to keep a count on the head of the elk calves. And he had seen a herd of elk cross the road in front of him as he was driving up a road they call Tiger Canyon, right there in the Blue Mountains. And they went across the road and they went up this old logging spur, and he decided to get out and follow them. And there were some deadfalls in the road, so he had to park his truck, and he went on foot. And he walked up this road about 3/4 of a mile when he started to get a whiff of this just, bad smell. And he describes it as like something that was dead or decomposing, kind of rotten with like a urine smell. So dead, musky, type deal. And about the time he caught the whiff of that scent, he started around a little bend in the road, and about 60 yards ahead of him, up on a bank where they had done some clear cutting, was this critter, that's what he called it, this critter, or this creature that stepped off about a 10-foot embankment right down in the middle of the road and stopped to look at him. And they looked at each other for a few moments, and my dad took a couple steps back and had never seen anything like this, didn't know what it was. His first description of it was it reminded him of a prehistoric man, except that it was more hairy, and that the face on it was not exactly human, but maybe more ape-like, you know, in a way. Anyways, yeah, it's they looked at each other, and it eventually turned and walked off down the road, and then it walked up a hill and into some timber, about 300 yards, 200 to 300 yards, and disappeared. And my dad, you know, took a couple steps more backward and fell down, hooked his heel on a rock. He actually dropped his keys in the road and couldn't find them to his truck, and then ran down the logging spur to get back to his service vehicle, and couldn't even get his keys in the door to unlock it, and couldn't get the CB radio to work to call for help, because he was just too nervous. And he made it to the ranger station there, and was able to get a hold of his superiors. But that was his initial encounter. And, you know, yeah, like I said, he saw something that changed him forever, and it really did set off an obsession.
When he came home from work and shared that story with you and your mom, what was the reaction in the house? Was it something that she believed immediately? Is it something you believed at the time?
Well, you know, I was 5 years old, and so I don't have a really strong memory of that particular day or that event taking place, you know, or how he was and what his frame of mind was when he came home from that. I know more now that I'm older and I've learned things, you know, and so I feel like I have better memories of it, but I probably really don't. What I remember from those days is people. I remember Grover Krantz being around, and I remember Renee DeHinden, you know, being around, and Bob Titmus. And so I remember faces, and I remember people, and I remember Renee and like his voice and kind of the way that he acted, and he was at the house a lot during that time period. But as far as like remembering the actual event when I was 5, I really don't. I just remember more people being around than normal, and just the house kind of being busy.
You said it started this obsession for your dad. Obviously, you grew up and saw that as you got older. What did that look like for you and him as he started down this path of researching these things? I'm assuming he was in search of another experience, or was he looking to prove these things were real for other people? What did that look like for you and him as he started that journey?
Well, yeah, he was absolutely in search of proving that these things were real. And there was a time period where he was, you know, dead set that he was going to kill one, because he was going to prove that they were real, and he wasn't crazy. And then for me, you know, there was a period of time I didn't get to go out and be a part of the Bigfoot research and what he was doing until I was 10 years old. That's the first time I ever got taken out to any tracks, anything like that. We went hunting and stuff like that before that, but he didn't involve me in Bigfoot, you know, until 1987, which is 5 years after, you know, he'd had that initial encounter. But what I remember in those other years leading up to that, when he was still doing his research, is just him being in the newspaper and hearing things from other kids at school, stuff like that, like kind of being teased or being ridiculed. You know, there's always that. My dad says your dad is crazy, or my dad says your dad's a liar, you know. And we moved a couple times in that time period. We actually moved away from Walla Walla, and you know, we went back to Camas, Washington, which is where we were originally from, and ended up coming back to the Walla Walla area, you know, about 3 years later, because he just couldn't stay away from it. But yeah, he was famous, infamous, you know, kind of a local celebrity. And so, you know, I guess you could say it was odd, but I mean, honestly, you know, where it started when I was so young, I didn't know any better. Like, that was just my dad. And I would hear things from people, you know, that were kind of cruel from time to time. And then there were also people that were really interested. And I had some great teachers that always had questions for me and stuff like that to include me. So, you know, but yeah, dad was, man, obsessed with proving that, you know, he wasn't a crazy person. Yeah, absolutely.
So I know he had other experiences. Let's talk about his second encounter. What did that look like? What did that consist of, and what happened during that encounter?
Well, his second encounter actually was in 1988. And that was with my older brother, Dwayne. And they were deer hunting, and they saw one. And my brother actually got some photographs of it real quick. And then he saw first. And then he took off running to go find my dad, who was about 200 yards away, which kind of ended up spoiling, in a way, like the opportunity to get any better, photographs or evidence on that. But that's actually the second encounter that he had. And I'm assuming, and forgive me for assuming, that you might be alluding to the Deduct Spring footage is kind of where you're going with that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get there.
Yeah. So, and that's a few years later. But yeah, the second encounter was with my brother. That's the second visual encounter. And that would be, 1988.
So when your dad's having these experiences for himself, and obviously you said your brother was there for the second time that he had an encounter and actually saw one of these things, did he start taking a look at things like the Patterson-Gimlin film, for example? Is that something you guys talked about around the dinner table? Is that something that he believed was real for himself? Or was there other stuff out there that he believed was proof that these things were real? What was the evidence that your dad was taking a look at as a researcher at the time? Do you remember?
Yeah, he was, my dad was a very big supporter of the Patterson film. And I remember we used to watch that around the house all the time. And that was even before the second encounter. I mean, after the first one, that was something that we watched a lot. And I remember, relatives or people would come over and my dad would want to show them that, and some people believe it and some people, don't believe it. Of course, my dad, at this time, and by 1988 was already hobnobbing with Renee DeHinden and John Green, Peter Byrne, Bob Titmus, Grover Krantz, of course, had become a really familiar face by that point in time and was around a lot. So my dad had a lot of evidence that he, had the opportunity to see and that was at his disposal. And myself as well. I mean, I remember being in Krantz's lab at WSU as a kid and just thinking, like, how cool is this place, and there's all these things. And of course there's cast and Sasquatch evidence, but I remember being like, 8 or 9 years old or so and being obsessed with this skeletal cat that he had sitting on the desk and not caring so much about, like the Bigfoot cast that they were talking about or looking at the time. Eric Beckjord was another guy that was around a lot. You might think that's odd because him and my dad had such differing views on like origin of Sasquatch, but they enjoyed each other's personal company, I guess you could say. And so they were, friends for a little while there. But yeah, as far as, the Patterson film goes, like, yeah, my dad was always just telling everybody, like, how can you not believe this? Like, look at this,
What about you when you're taking a look at that then and now? Where are you on the Patterson-Gimlin film?
Well, it's the best piece of visual evidence that we have, for sure. Absolutely. There's nothing better than that. I'll admit it's number one. My dad's footage from Deduct, I think, is probably number two, but Patterson's number one. And it's a great piece of visual evidence. And visual evidence is nice. Don't get me wrong. But it's not the best evidence we have. I mean, in my opinion, at least, the best evidence we have is footprint evidence because it's tangible physical evidence and you can hold it and you can look at it and you can make casts and you can compare and you can see, the anatomical features. And I think we know much more about, the species from footprint evidence than we do from the visual evidence. So even though that stuff is nice, I don't think it's the most important evidence we have. But it's great to look at. And, I've never seen one. I've never had a personal encounter. So I can only imagine what it's like for, Bob and Roger or my dad, even my brother to see one of these things and have that experience.
Well, we've mentioned it a couple of times. Let's fast forward and get to the meat and potatoes. Let's talk about the footage that your dad got during be his third encounter. Let's sort of tell the audience, some people may not be familiar with it. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of set the stage and tell people what was going on, where he was, and what happened during that encounter.
Yeah. And, a lot of people don't know the Deduct footage is actually the fourth sighting. There's one about 4 months prior to Deduct where there's a sighting as well. But moving into deduct, you know, and that footage, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, don't realize, and I've been talking about it a lot lately, you know, so hopefully they will at some point here, that, you know, there was a lot of work that led up to that. And it wasn't like a one-time off chance encounter. There was actually about 10 years worth of map, you know, dating and location dating on there, of sightings and tracks and hair finds and nest finds, to lead my dad to really concentrate on this one particular area. And that area is Deduct Spring. And it's really a hotbed, or it was at the time, at least in the Blue Mountains, for, you know, Bigfoot activity. And it just kind of radiated out from there. But year after year, we get signs at Deduct, and we get signs in late summer. And, you know, my dad had kind of pinpointed that from his Forest Service map and all the data that was being recorded on there. And, you know, the week leading up to him getting the footage, he'd been there every single day. And he had been there for hours in the morning as soon as day would break, looking for sign, looking for prints, watching the pond there, just trying to get something. And he always had his video camera at that point in time. And he was always filming at that point in time. And we have hours of footage of him just like filming tracks and talking to other people and doing stuff like that. So, you know, what he was doing was ordinary, obviously. And what happened was, you know, out of the ordinary, because, you know, we happened to just walk up on one that day. But, you know, there's a reason that he gets that one on film. And I don't know if you've ever heard that story or not, but he had been going and getting up there at about 6 o'clock in the morning every day that week, and at least 2 or 3 days a week for like the past 3 weeks. And he wasn't, you know, seeing them, and he wasn't finding as much sign as he thought he was going to find. And the night before he got the footage, actually, you know, he'd gotten a phone call from my sister, and her car was broke down and it wouldn't start. And she asked him if he would come over and fix her car. And he said he would. And so he got up the next morning and he went over there and he got her car running. And he wasn't going to go to Deduct that day. He was actually going to sleep because he was working a night job at that time. And he was just kind of running himself ragged, getting off work at like 5 o'clock in the morning and driving up to Deduct. And on the way home, he just, you know, kind of thought, well, I'll just go up there. You know, my mom was at work. I was going to be hanging out with some friends that day, you know, that type of deal. He loved being in the mountains anyway. And so he decided to just go up and check and see if there was maybe any fresh sign. And he got there, in my estimation, about 10:30 in the morning. So about 4.5 hours later than he normally was there looking for them. And yeah, one was there. So, you know, I don't know if it was him being late and then being used to his routine, and they were watching him and like waiting for him to leave, that type of thing, or waiting for his scent to be gone. And then they were coming and getting the water. But that day, for whatever reason, when he wasn't there at his normal time, and he was about 4.5 hours late, he just walked right up on one that was there.
I'll definitely put the footage over on the website for everybody to take a look at. It's out there. It's on YouTube. It's all over the place. If you haven't seen it, you got to go check it out. So he catches this thing on camera, right? And he's actually, before that happens, he's found footprints, and he's casting these footprints. And then he sees this thing. It basically walks across right in front of him, and he's got the camera up, obviously, and he's filming it. What happened after he had this encounter and he caught this thing on film? He comes home and he's got this stuff on camera. What was it like in the house after he captured that evidence?
Yeah, well, when he got home, me and some buddies of mine were actually the first ones that ever got to watch it, because he came home and he busts through the door, you know, and he's yelling for my mom, who's at work. He totally forgot she was at work, you know, because he's just, you know, not in his normal state of mind, I guess you could say, you know, and he's obviously excited and highly excited and agitated. And my friends and I, we come upstairs because, you know, Dad's up there stomping around and yelling, and, you know, you think something's wrong maybe. And, you know, here's my dad, and, you know, he's 6'5" and he's 275 pounds. And he's you know, he's the toughest man I ever knew in my entire life. I mean, hands down. And he's shaking, and he's pale, you know, and he's sweating, and he is just like all over the place, back and forth, just hyped up, nervous, those things. And his eyes are as big as saucers, and he's telling us like, that he's got it on film. I've got it on film. Finally, I'm not crazy, this type of thing and all that stuff. And, it was one of those, it was an 8mm, digital magnetic tape. So it was one of those little cameras and you plugged it into the TV. And my friends and I, we got to watch it. And it was just like, okay, Dad found tracks and he's walking around and he's talking and we're just kind of like, okay. And then, here it comes. And I just remember everyone just stops. And I don't know how we didn't wear the tape out that day, to be honest, because I don't know how many times we watched it. We probably watched it at least 10 times and had him rewind it, and you look at it and obviously it's, it's not a bear. And, being, where we were and we were a hunting family. And that's the first thing that pops out is, that's not a bear, and it's not a man, and you don't know what it is. But it was shortly after that, actually, we watched it a bunch of times. He kind of calmed down and then he made a phone call to Wes Summerlin and he packed it up and he went to Wes Summerlin's house to show him, what he'd found. And then, later my mom came home and my dad wasn't even home. He was at Wes's and he was at Wes's till pretty late, but we got to watch it again when, my mom came home and, then we got to watch it again because it was on the news like 2 days later. And it was a big thing, but man, he was excited. I don't think I've ever seen him so excited, and I've never seen him scared of anything. And that's the only time I've ever seen him scared.
I can only imagine. So this thing gets out there, right? It's on the news a couple of days later. How did that change things for your dad as far as his research and what had been going on? And how did things change for you guys once that was out there in the zeitgeist for everybody to see?
Right. Yeah. Well, he had that moment where it was like, yes, finally I got it. I'm not crazy. I don't have to kill one. Here it is, and it was a moment. I mean, to be honest, and that's what it is, because it's Bigfoot, and you know how it is with Bigfoot. And the first thing you get is, oh, that's not real, or, oh, that's a man in a suit, or, it's this or it's that, and it can't be real. So, yeah, he had a moment, and then you get brought down real fast by all the skeptics and all the naysayers, and then you just have to try to prove yourself, over and over again. The difference between this video and anything else he'd really ever done, I guess with the exception of finding the dermals, in 82, is that this made national news and it wasn't just local. And then there was some more shows like Hard Copy and some of that stuff came knocking on the door and they wanted him, on there. And by this point in time, he was kind of skittish and shy of the national media a little bit because he'd had a bad experience on Good Morning America in 1987. And this was a little different. I think it was treated with a little more respect this time around. And there were, some people that for sure were on board, but yeah, I mean, he became more of a local celebrity, like immediately. I was 15 at the time, and it was just a year or so previous, I had started to draw back from Bigfoot a little bit because I was just kind of tired of, taking some of the ridicule and people not believing my dad and in the news media and stuff like that. And we'd seen Good Morning America and we'd heard all this stuff. And, not to mention my dad was never home, and so we were all kind of tired of it, to be honest. And my brother and I kind of withdrew back, and just kind of just shoves you like right back in it. And then all of a sudden it starts all over again, and it's on like a bigger circuit. But I remember, honestly, this was probably the first event that ever happened to my dad where I was actually like proud of like what he had done and not slightly embarrassed and standoffish, if that makes sense. And it was kind of like, yeah, okay, we got it this time. Yeah.
So I guess most people would think, like the Patterson Gimlin film, your dad's film, people put things out there, and myself included at sometimes, you think automatically it's going to be the greatest thing ever. This is the thing that you've sought this, you've busted your ass for 10 years to find this, and you finally get it on camera. And like you said, I think the flip side to that is the 90% of the people, 99% of the people out there are going to say that's not real. And I'll be honest, I've went back and forth with the Patterson Gimlin film. I still go back and forth with the Patty film. I still go back and forth with your dad's stuff and say, God, it's so difficult to see enough detail. And I'm so glad, and we're going to get to some of the things that you're doing now currently to sort of rectify that situation with the film itself. But it's got to be tough for your dad, and obviously you and your mom and your brother, to go through once people are starting to try to tear him down and strip that away. I want to talk a little bit about not just the film, but some of the other things that your dad did. You mentioned the dermals. You mentioned some of the foot castings. I know that, there were people taking a look at his evidence that he was finding. Grover Krantz, Renee DeHenden, Jeff Meldrum was involved in looking at some of your dad's stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the evidence that's outside what he caught on video that people may not know about, that you want people to understand. Your dad was boots on the ground and he was finding this evidence. So talk a little bit about some of the things that people may not know.
Yeah, he was definitely boots on the ground. I mean, 3 to 4 days a week for 15 years. He was in the mountains, and it wasn't uncommon for him to be gone even a week or sometimes 2 weeks at a time, out there. And so he was definitely boots on the ground. He was finding evidence, and probably the best evidence he ever found were the dermals. And that was at Elk Wallow in June 16th, 1982. Him and another Forest Service employee, a man by the name of Bill Epic, found that they were on lunch, actually, and kind of stumbled across these tracks. And, they're called the dermals because they have dermatoglyphics, and a really fine example of those. Grover Krantz, yeah, he kind of, went all in on those. And that's something that he supported all the way to the end of his life. Like he never backed down on those. And he took those to the University of British Columbia and did a symposium on that. And he took them to the Smithsonian Institution. And the originals, there's a left foot and a right foot, what we call the dermals. And both the originals of those are still in the Smithsonian, and those are fantastic footprints that have fantastic, dermatoglyphics on them, and they also show, that's articulating like biomechanics, like the foot movement, which is what we want to look for as well, not just the cookie cutter prints. So those are really good, and those are fantastic. And he's got a lot of other evidence as well. We have the wrinkle foot casts from Table Springs in 1984. Dr. Krantz named those wrinkle foot because they have these really rigid skin striations on the bottom of them. And, he thought that was probably an older female. And I agree with him that it is a female, because of the size. They're only about 14 inches. And we have, instances of her leaving tracks for just about 10 years, actually, through the blues on a bunch of different occasions. And so she's actually one of the most highly documented individual Sasquatch that's in the entire database. She's been seen multiple times. We have multiple pictures of her, and we have multiple casts of her. And she's was really out there for a long time, but she has an odd shaped foot. And she has a really odd shaped pinky toe. And she's very obvious, but she's a really good example of toe splay. And she has scarring on the bottom of her feet, and she has some dermatoglyphics, and some rigid skin striations. And you can read about her in Dr. Krantz's book, Big Footprints. That was the first edition. I can never recall what the second edition of it was called. You can also read about her in Dr. Meldrum's book, Sasquatch, A Legend Meets Science. And speaking of Dr. Meldrum, the last great thing I always say my dad ever did in Bigfoot was take Dr. Meldrum to a place called Five Points in 1996 and show him a set of tracks that were fresh. And Jeff and his brother Mike had been visiting Dr. Krantz in Pullman. And on the way back to Boise, they decided to surprise my father, not let him know they would come in. They just cold knocked on our door. My dad had never met him before. And I guess, you know, if you listen to the story, you know, Meldrum kind of thought maybe my dad might have been like kind of a hoaxer, like some of this stuff he wasn't quite sold, and Meldrum wasn't quite sold on Bigfoot at the time either. They looked at some plaster casts in our garage, and after a little while, as Jeff would tell you, my dad stopped and said, well, you know, obviously you're serious and you're smart, you know, do you want to go see some actual tracks? And, you know, Jeff was like, yeah, whatever, what have I got to lose? You know, come on, let's go look. And, you know, my dad takes him up there and boom, here we go. And Jeff cast these, and, you know, it's the 5-point tracks. And it's kind of what made him change his career trajectory as far as Bigfoot goes. And it's a really famous trackway that he gets a lot of attention for. And they're fantastic tracks. You know, I know Jeff will tell you, you know, if he talks, he gets goosebumps when he talks about seeing those tracks for the first time, and how he could actually see the dermatoglyphics in the tracks in the ground, and it was raining and they were just disappearing before his eyes, like as they were trying to get plaster mixed to like get these, you know, get these tracks cast. So, but yeah, I mean, there's not just the video, you know, deduct, and that's what my dad's really famous for. But if you want to know the truth and you take a look at the evidence and you look at it scientifically and you read, you know, Meldrum's book and you read Kranz's book and stuff like that, Paul Freeman actually has some of the best footprint evidence that's ever been found.
I'm glad you told that story, because Jeff told that story when I had him on the show, and I got goosebumps having him tell me the story. And yeah, I did the same just now.
Much better than I do. It's because it didn't happen to me, you know, but yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't realize that history with your dad's involvement. They just see this, you know, 8 or 10 minute video or whatever that's online, and they think that's all there is to it. So I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing now and sort of carrying that torch and picking that torch up and telling your dad's story today to a brand new audience that frankly has never heard it before. So I'm so glad that you're doing that. So that said, let's talk a little bit about what you've got going on now. What are you involved in now? Let's talk about the book. How did that come about? And what has that process been like for you?
Yeah, well, yeah, I am writing a book, or I've written a book, I guess you could say, called the Freeman Bigfoot Files. And, you know, just when I say I've written it, it always makes me feel weird to say that, because it's not like a book that's filled with 300 pages of prose. So I like to say, like, I put together a book, I guess, more or less, because it is a large coffee table style book, probably about 200 pages, I think, when we get to the final stage. But it's, you know, it's called the Freeman Files for a reason, and that's because it's an evidence catalog, and it's going to have over like 150 full page, full color photographs of trackways and individual tracks, and, you know, the dermals and casts and all these people that he worked with and he met, and the pictures my brother took in 1988. And we're going to have, you know, all kinds of, you know, pictures of the family and all this stuff. And all these pictures come from personal photo albums or from evidence catalogs, you know. And so it really is, you know, at heart, I think, an evidence catalog. And then it has some, you know, prose in there. And I got some great people to help me do it. You know, Cliff Barrickman has written a chapter for it, and he's a good friend of mine. And he decided, you know, he wanted to help me out. And Dr. Meldrum wrote a fantastic chapter as well. I got Doug Hychek, who discovered an anomaly in the footage that is going to be famous here pretty soon. Hopefully, you know, some people know about that. Some, you know, I would say 99% of the people don't. And Jonathan Summerlin, who's the grandson of Wes Summerlin, wrote a chapter for me, and Tom Powell, who's fantastic, from Portland, Oregon, and a guy that actually did the single best piece of journalism ever written on my dad, in my opinion, has provided me something for the book. And then I've written like 4 chapters, you know, the book myself. And then what's really special is I got Dar Addington from Walla Walla. And she was a female researcher that was part of my dad's little group of researchers and friends there that went out. And it's the first thing that she's ever done publicly with Bigfoot is help me out and write something for this book. And so it's fantastic. But, you know, to further answer your question, it's actually something that I kind of kicked around in about 2016. And I kind of wanted to do it. And what idea I had at that time was kind of a different book, actually. And it was kind of more about me and like what it was like growing up. And then my dad was going to be the background sort of, the book. And it just kind of died out, and it went away, and there was really nothing there. And then I started talking to Cliff Barrickman, and, I was like, hey, Cliff, like, what do you think of this idea? Type deal. And, I'll say first and foremost, Cliff and I are really good friends. And so we had a conversation, and we both agreed that maybe going into business together is not the best thing for friendships, to do. But he'd be more than happy to help me with it in any way that he could. And I think it was the next day, like, I got a phone call from Doug Hychek. And Doug Hychek was friends with my father and had worked with my father, and had used the Deduct Spring footage and licensed it from my dad. And they got along really well. And Doug always really liked my dad and everything. And he called me the next day, and he's like, hey, I want to do it. Let's do it. And I said, yeah, let's go, Doug, and so we had a meeting, and we started talking, and, we kind of came to the conclusion that's the best way to do it is to show people my dad's evidence. So instead of me, writing a book or writing a story, is we're going to show them, let's show them the evidence. Let's do it. Let's do what, a lot of other Bigfooters don't do. Let's not keep it secret. Let's reveal the secrets that are there. And so we're showing all the footprint, trackways, and we're giving the locations of them, and we're showing all the casts, and I'm showing my dad's Forest Service map, and I'm giving you the decoding for it. So you know what all the symbols mean and where everything's at. And then on top of that, we've got about 7 hours of audio that my dad recorded in private in a cassette recorder on all these audio tapes. And when I tell you that no one has ever heard them except for me, like, I'm not lying, I'm serious. Nobody has ever heard these except for me. And I've taken about an hour of that because, we have restrictions on time, and I can't put all 7 hours of audio, in provide. I guess I could, but, he kind of wanders on a little bit, and some of it's like, I'm going to talk about this horse for like 45 minutes. Right. So we got about an hour of the audio, and we're putting that in the book with, scannable QR codes. And it's just going to be him talking about like the stuff that's going on in the book. So you're going to get his own story. We've also got, footage that he shot that no one's ever seen, that's never been released, along with enhancements of the Freeman footage that's going to show you the footage in a way you've never seen, and most likely something that you never even knew existed. So.
Well, we teased that a little bit. What can you tell us about what Doug discovered and what people can expect when that is released?
Yeah, and it's being teased, but I've been talking about it a little bit lately, and you're not the first interview I've had, so the cat's kind of out of the bag at this point. Plus, it's been a rumor for a really long time, and there's a rumor that there's a baby, there's a small infant, or a very small juvenile Sasquatch in my dad's footage, and that you can see at one point in time the mother pick it up from a tree, and she puts it like on her hip, and it's been a rumor for a really long time since it was discovered. Now, the footage was shot in 1992, and Doug Hychek discovered this strange anomaly that was going on at one certain point in this video, and he discovered it around around 2001. So almost 10 years after the film was shot is when someone actually noticed this happening in the footage. And if you see it now with the enhancements, you're like, how could nobody notice this before? I never noticed it. My dad never even knew about it. And Doug brought it to him about 2001 and said, Paul, I found this. You have to see this. And, Doug will tell you there was a lot of, oh my God, like, what is this, going on at the time. But it wasn't good enough. And it kind of got sat on, and it didn't get pushed and released because of the type of footage that it is, and it's, like I said, it's 8mm digital magnetic tape. It's 400 pixels. You can't enhance it. You can't blow it up. You can't zoom in on it. It just blurs. And it's really not great technology for doing strong enhancements on. And so it's something that got sat on. And then, you know, in the mid 2000s, kind of, you started hearing a few people here and there saying, oh, you know, there's a baby in this footage and all this stuff. And I remember I was shutting people down and saying that there's not a baby in the footage. I don't even want to hear you talk about this. Like, people would post videos and I would message them and I'd be like, can we take this down? Like, or they would post things and I'd be like, no, I'm not supporting this. Like, can you take this down? And part of it was because I wasn't 100% sold, because you couldn't see what was going on. And I don't want to be one of those people that just blindly jumps on it, you know? And if you listen to an interview I did with Doug recently, like, he even says on there, like, you were the skeptic on this. Like, and it's true. I was the skeptic on the baby, you know? But Doug Hychek has been enhancing this footage for 20 years. And we finally have it to the point where technology is helping us, that I'm comfortable with releasing this. And so, you know, I'm holding it right now. Sorry, everybody. You know, you can't see it yet. But when the book comes out, it's going to be released with the book. And there's a section of there in the footage, and you can see it. It's plain as day. This adult Sasquatch picks up an infant. You can see its leg. You can see its leg move. You can see its foot attached to its leg. It's articulating. You can see its head go up on her shoulder. You can see its butt, for lack of a better term, stick out when she picks it up. Just like right now, I have a 1-year-old, you know, and you know, when I pick him up, he does the same thing. He wraps his legs around me, you know, and his butt kind of sticks out. And it's plain as day in this footage. And everyone's going to see it. And, you know, recently someone mentioned to me that despite everything else that's on that footage, and, you know, the Sasquatch walking in front of the tree, and, you know, oh, there he goes, Jesus, and everything my dad says that everybody quotes, that the actual important part of this film is what we're getting at to right now, because you know, this baby that's in there is probably actually the most important part of the entire piece of footage.
Well, I definitely can't wait to see it. I think that's going to be really interesting stuff. Outside of this enhanced footage and what you're talking about now, is there anything else as far as your dad's evidence, or anything that's going to be in the book, or anything that you've come across putting this together that you really want to get across to people, or anything that really stood out to you that surprised you about his evidence and the things that he had collected in his research?
Oh, I learn stuff every day. I really do. I mean, honestly, and I thought I knew the evidence really well, but you know, honestly, putting this book together, I wanted to make sure everything was 100% correct, you know, and that's the first thing I got to do. And so I'm going through photographs and hours of footage and and when I say photographs, I mean like 600, you know, close to 574, I think, photographs of like tracks that were, you know, on the table at one point in time, that I'm going through, and I'm trying to document them with correct date and correct location, and I'm trying to match them to see which of these tracks belong to the same individuals. You know, and I'm looking at casts, and I'm looking at pictures that go with casts. And I'm talking to Cliff Barrickman, and I'm sending him pictures and photos. And I'm talking to Jeff Meldrum, and I'm sending him pictures and photos. And we're talking to each other, and we're matching these animals. And, you know, a lot of it, but there were some things that were discovered. And it's like, wow, okay, you know what? I think this is this individual. I think this is Wrinklefoot. And this is 4 years after the last time we've ever seen Wrinklefoot make a track. Like, holy crud, you know, or whatever, like some cool stuff like that. The one thing, you know, I will say that I wish people paid more attention to, or something I wish people realized, is that, you know, if you have, say, you know, for example, you know, my dad had research for 15 years, just over 15 years of, you know, almost, you know, every day, at least every week, going out and researching. And we have about between 45 and 50, you know, plaster casts in his collection. And, you know, people like to say that he's really lucky because he found tracks so much, you know, and I want to point out to people that if you have 45, you know, tracks in your collection, if you have 45 plaster casts, that doesn't mean you found plaster casts, or it doesn't mean you found tracks on 45 different occasions. It doesn't mean they're from 45 different Bigfoot. Okay. It means that you found a trackway, and that you took, they were taking between 3 and 5 casts from some of these trackways, and over a 15-year period. And when you look at my dad's evidence, it boils down to, 45 casts, 15 years. That's 3 casts a year, taking 3 to 5 casts from each trackway, right? Then you're looking at like 1 set of tracks a year is what he was finding, pretty much. And there were some sightings involved as well, but it wasn't like he was finding tracks every day. And the guy was out there 3 to 4 days a week, every week, except for like in the very harsh, like middle of winter when he couldn't get in there, and then, all summer long. And you take a guy that is a good tracker and a good hunter, and he's experienced at what he's doing, and he knows what he's looking for. And he's in a really good area that's considered a hot spot for its time. One set of tracks a year is, that's not the luckiest Bigfooter that ever lived. Like, certainly, but people don't realize that. They think like, oh, he's got 45 casts. Oh gosh, who has that many casts? Well, that type of thing. But a lot of people do, actually. And especially, and there's people now, they're taking 10 casts from each trackway. He wasn't taking 1 from each one. They were taking multiple rights, and they were taking multiple lefts. And, they were out there collecting and doing the research. And, yeah, we have a lot of tracks, but we spend a lot of time. So, but well, yeah, I wish people would realize that, that he it wasn't luck. He put the time in, and that if you do the math and you look at it realistically, what he found really isn't that much evidence.
Is that the one thing that you want people to take away from the experience with the book, is the time put into it, the evidence there, or is there something else that you really want people to come away from when they experience this book that you've put together?
Yeah, well, 2 things, really. I mean, honestly, number one, I want people to realize that my dad was a person, and that the book is the story of a man as well, and not just an evidence catalog, and he had a wife, and he had children, and family, and he had feelings, and stuff like that. And so I want people to realize that there's, aside from the Bigfoot stuff, that there's the story of a man. That's number one. And number 2, something I'm trying to drive home to people, and that I really want people to realize, and I do challenge people in the book as well. It's something I challenge the reader to do, is I want people to look, and not just at my dad, and not just at Bigfoot, but cryptids in general, the paranormal, and aliens, whatever. I want to challenge people to take a look at the evidence that's presented in front of you from a scientific standpoint, and actually consider it, and then draw your own conclusions like from that after you've educated yourself with taking a look at the evidence, and not just to listen to rumors or hearsay that you may have heard about somebody, or just, to blindly just not believe something, but to actually take a look at it. Because if you start taking a look and a deep dive scientifically into the Blue Mountain evidence, which is what my dad was a part of, and there were other people there as well, but when you start looking at that, it's some of the best evidence that we have that supports the theory of the existence of Bigfoot. And I think it would change a lot of people's perspective if they would just stop saying, listening to that little voice that says, oh, Paul Freeman, oh, Renee DeHinden didn't like him. Okay, never mind. And they would actually take a look at the evidence and take a look at maybe why Renee DeHinden didn't like that particular evidence at that point in time. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we know a lot more now about the anatomy and the structure of the foot of Sasquatch than we did in the early 80s. And some of the things that these other famous researchers were criticizing are actually legitimate reasons why we should be trusting the evidence now, because they just didn't know. But yeah, so we are in the business of Bigfoot, and we are in the business of evidence, not rumors.
Evidence, not rumors, folks. That's if you don't take away anything else from this episode, that may be the name of the episode. Evidence, not rumors.
There we go.
So we've talked about it enough. When can we see the book? When do you think the book's going to be released? Any ideas on when people can start getting it? I know you can pre-order it now, and I'll have a link for that in the show notes, obviously. But when do you expect the full release of the book?
Yeah, well, we can pre-order it now. You're correct. I have been told, and a lot of this depends on me. So if it's not true, you can blame me. I have been told 2 to 3 weeks to print and ship from this point moving forward. Now, honestly, and you know how this goes, this depends on me because I have to pass the final version of the book. And if I don't, because, you know, there's an extra space between a letter or something like that, and I don't want to have typos and stuff, then we're going to get delayed again, and it'll be my fault, and you can blame it on me. If I pass the next version of the book that I get, then we're looking at like probably 2 weeks for it to go into print, and people should start receiving the book. Yeah.
Awesome. Everybody go over to the show notes, check it out, get your pre-ordered copy now. They're going to fly off the shelf. Michael Freeman, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I've had a blast talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I was looking forward to it. And, you know, maybe after the book comes out, we can do it again or something.
They say you don't